And welcome back to Here I Stand. Pastor Calvin Lindstrom, Pastor James Pittman, our co-hosts on Here I Stand, a ministry of the Christian Emergency League. If you have not visited ChristianEmergencyLeague.org, you can learn more about what we're trying to do, encourage pastors and other Christian leaders to stand for truth. We are discussing debating, as it were, the topic of America as a Christian nation. And if you missed the first segment, we said it's a complex question. And we're going to talk about some of the good and the bad in our nation's history. Mm-hmm. You have to identify both. There's an interesting book written by, I know the last name is Keeler. His book is called This Rebellious House. He took the phrase from the book of Ezekiel and applied it to aspects of our nation's history. I thought it was an interesting book. I remember reading it quite a while ago. Should return to that. But let me mention a few other things, James, that are troubling when you think of America as a Christian nation or issues for it. How does the Constitution begin? We the people. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a good and a bad to that, right? In that it's not we the king or I the king, we the people. Mm-hmm. But what's the problem with that? It sounds almost like Vox Populi, Vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God.
That's what it is by definition. Because if you're saying, again, majority rule, not truth,
right?
Majority rules.
Well, it can turn into that very easily. So if you have a Christian people, then maybe there's a good voice. But if it's severed from divine truth, from God, mm-hmm. that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Roger Williams is the founder of Rhode Island. And we pointed out last week, Rhode Island still had laws mm-hmm. against sodomy. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. And I pointed out that they cited English common law and scripture in coming to that conclusion. But Roger Williams does have a different idea of the structure of government, and this is where Baptists and some Presbyterians mm-hmm. or Puritans divide. But it's interesting. Roger Williams did have a different model, even though there were biblical aspects in that. Mm-hmm. And yet, at least certainly from the perspective of the historian Gary North, controversial figure I know, he points in part the blame to Roger Williams and the experiment that he ran in Rhode Island, the idea of somewhat of a civil religious neutrality versus the model in Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Explain a little more. What does he mean, religious neutrality?
Well, the idea that you could have not any single religion as the fundamental basis.
So he opens the door for Islam? He opens the door for other religions, paganism?
Here's the interesting thing. In one sense, I would say yes, even though at the time they did have a biblical basis. Some of their laws, as I pointed out in our last show, they're definitely looking to Scripture, but maybe you could say they open the door so that when the population changes, hey, you're going to see some of these other changes.
That's strange. You know, the one guide I look at, here's the one guide. The one guide is that when God, he set up a government, it was not a republic. It was a loose republic. Let's just put it that way. But at no point did majority rule. It was not put up that way.
Well, the king ruled.
But the king originally did not rule when they went to the promised land. If you look at the constitution of the nation of Israel, which is the law of Moses, mm-hmm. who had the power of life and death? It wasn't the king. It was the high priest. Originally, the high priest was the head of state. He carried the sword, and at no point, even when the king came, did that necessarily change. Now, in practice, the king did.
Sure, but you don't. So, for example, in the book of in Kings,
yes,
the high priest is not putting people to death.
No, he is. That's what I'm saying. In practice, the king became the head of state, and he did wield the power of life and death. But if you look at the law that Moses wrote, when you appealed and the death sentence was carried out, it was the high priest's function.
Yeah,
right?
I would say there were judges. They had to, they
right.
needed to have a sort of a judicial system so that
Yes.
the witnesses could present the facts.
Yeah, and who were the judges? What was that? It was the Levitical priesthood that did it.
Or maybe perhaps Levites. Maybe
Yeah,
they weren't
Levites, that's
always priests, but Levites, so people who knew the law.
I'm
right?
sorry, I thought I said the Levites, the Levitical priesthood.
Well, okay, it could have been someone who is a Levite, not a priest.
Oh, got you saying of the line of Aaron. Yes, that's what I meant. Yes, it was. That's what I mean by the Levites. They were the judges. But remember, for 400 years, there was no king.
Right.
Judges arose when there was a problem and they needed a head of state. So even let's say even Rome had this sort of issue, right? Rome had the republic, but in the state of war, they would constitutionally elect what? A dictator. And his time was limited. I think that's what the judges did. And so when you had problems, foreign countries invading, or a lot of times those judges were the one who were elevated, right? From Gideon to Deborah to all of them, they were in times of war. Samson, right? But when at peace, there was no judge, right? Except for maybe Samuel.
There was a time of peace in some cases when that judge and his influence remained.
Afterwards. But he rose to power when you needed a strong figurehead.
No,
right?
You're right. Yep.
But when the king comes, the law of Moses never changed. In practice, it did. The king, and that was the warning with Samuel, right? When you elect a permanent head, because remember the judges, their kids did not take over.
Correct.
Their kids did not take over. And so you had that. And so you had the loose confederacy. So you had the tribes who had what? Elders. Elders rule.
That's right.
Never the masses.
Right.
Never, how can I say this? The fool didn't get a vote in that, right?
Right.
To whereas in our country, you could have declared bankruptcy 10 times. You could be a swindler, an alcoholic, a drug dealer, a meth head. Your vote is equal to the wisest man in the village.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Right.
So and I remember I love history and I love books. When Sparta was going up against Athens, the Spartan king said, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." He was talking to his nobles because it was Alcibiades from Athens. They said he was gifted. He was a gifted warrior on both land and sea. And the king of Sparta said, "Don't worry about it." In Athens, they have the fool gets the vote just like the wise, and says, and they will do what we can never do. Sure enough, I believe when Alcibiades was winning the war at Marathon, he was being voted an outlaw in Athens. And right after that, he had to flee. And the Spartan king was right, because in Sparta, the nobles ruled, not the idiots.
Right.
And Athens is the exact opposite. And Calvin, let's just be honest, I think in our culture, we're Athens. We're Athens.
Yeah.
We're Athens.
James, I think we would both agree with this. America is not Israel.
No.
There are lessons from Israel that I do think have applications for our nation.
Should. Yeah.
So one would be this: God gave to Israel his perfect law.
Yep.
And Israel so often then turned from that. But there's a standard.
Yes.
Our nation, in many ways, did have a godly influence.
Yes.
Whether that's English common law, which was based in large part on biblical principles. So English common law helps shape a lot of ideas in our nation. So there's a biblical standard, but just like Israel, it was not always followed.
Of course.
And even godly people did not always follow the scriptures the way that they should have.
No.
So there's a drifting from the ideal, from the standard. So we could look at it. Was America a Christian nation in the sense that there was a Christian influence? Yes. Did we follow through on it? No.
No.
Just like Israel, they have a perfect law. They do not follow that. Here's an interesting thing. You compare America and England. There's a sense where England had a more, you might say, a more Christian basis for their government through some of their kings, right? King Alfred the Great.
Yeah.
There's a long line, in a sense, of Christian leaders. And over time, right, they also turn from the truth and apostatize. There's a English Reformation, which is more of a political reformation, but it does lead to some godly principles, certainly. America does have a different history, certainly. We didn't have a king enforcing, a particular religion. There's an aspect where we had more religious influence in our nation than did England, even though we have a different basis. And so at some level, it's not always the form of government, but how God is working in the life of the church and the witness that his people are bringing to the truth.
And remember, Europe has a completely different history than we did. They had the papacy.
Mm-hmm.
They had the Pope, who was at one point the most powerful man, without question, in Europe. He wielded, quote unquote, religion as power.
Yeah.
Henry VIII stopped all of that. Well, he started the downfall of that, right? Henry VIII, and then you have the Reformation, and then you finally have the countries of Europe breaking away from it. We didn't have that. We did not have that. We're up against, again, a hard break. Time flies. We're doing well. You are listening to Here I Stand, a ministry of the Christian Emergency League. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.